The War of Betony by Vulper Newgate. The history of the Iliac Bay, if told in its entirety, would horrify readers more than the most gruesome legend of the Under-King. In comparison to the wars of the First and Second Era, our most recent appeal to arms, the War of Betony, pales. The siege of Orsinium lasted from the First Era 950 until the First Era 980, without a pause. 1,000 years later, the Thracian Plague, coupled with the War of the Righteousness, slayed over half the population of the Iliac Bay, and yet, the War of Betony fascinates us, and not just because of its immediacy. Ironically, Lord Mogeth of Betony was seeking peace when he asked for Daggerfall's protection on the Isle of Betony. The island had long been independent, but as the piracy in the bay increased, Mogeth truly realized Betony's vulnerability. King Lysandas agreed to be Betony's liege on advice of many, including his archpriest of Kinnereth, Lord Bennet. While Betony is a prosperous fishing village and well placed strategically, the vassalage of Betony was primarily an act of charity. Lysandas knew that if someone did not help Betony, it would fall to the pirates, if not someone worse. Unfortunately, King Cameron of Sentinel did not agree, citing a 200-year-old contract obliquely if not illegally written to suggest that Betony was a traditional holding of the Kingdom of Sentinel. Cameron declared war. The majority of his advisors, being warlords in a traditionally bellicose country, supported their king in this. The chief counselor, a woman called the Oracle, foresaw death and defeat in the war, but her wisdom was stifled and she was banished from court. Cameron should have listened to her. A few scrimmages of the War of Betony went to Sentinel, but the major battles were all won by Daggerfall. King Lysandas, his heir Prince Gothred, and the general of the army, Lord Bridwell, were fine leaders and warriors as well, and the Battle of the Bluffs and the Siege of Crackhold both went to Daggerfall. The war might have been won with one more victory, but for an unusual domestic incident at King Lysandas' court. The king's mother, the Dowager Queen Nolfaga, had been uneasy about the war since its beginning, but she now began to have visions of cataclysm. She saw the death of her beloved son should the war continue. Ebullient by his success, King Lysandas refused to listen to her fears until Nolfaga left court. Lysandas then realized how certain she was about his impending death. He began to actively negotiate a peace treaty with Sentinel, using the neutral lordship of Gradkeep as facilitator. The Treaty of Gradkeep was never to be. King Cameron was initially civil, as the losing side of war is often civil, but when he realized that the proposed treaty would have included a formal declaration that the kingdoms of Sentinel and Daggerfall would share Betony, he flew into a rage. With no thought for the protocol of attacking a neutral, peaceable lordship, Cameron ordered his army to riot through Gradkeep. First the halls of the palace, and then the streets of the capital ran red with blood. It was only with the support of the Daggerfall army that the chaos was brought under relative control. The Sentinel army fled to the Yorth Burrowland, and the Daggerfall army chased them as far as the Ravinian forest before making camp. 1 week later, after each had be sent for reinforcements and planned their strategies, the armies met in the field that separated them, the flowering meadowland called Cringane Field. In the heat of the clash, an unnatural fog spread over the field, blinding all combatants. When the mist finally lifted, King Lysandas' body was found, his throat pierced by an unmarked arrow. Daggerfall did not waste any time in the morning. Young Prince Gothred, who had shown great bravery in battle and was very popular among the troops, was crowned King of Daggerfall, just behind the battle lines, and he ordered the army onward. Perhaps it was the sight of the brave young warrior turned king appearing on the battlefield in full regalia that inspired the Daggerfall army. Perhaps the battle would have turned regardless. Sentinel began to panic. King Gothred met King Cameron before the Redguards had retreated, and the two monarchs fought. Both were excellent warriors, but Gothred was a more skillful swordsman, and Cameron fell that day. Lord Orsum of Sentinel finally surrendered to Daggerfall, giving up all rights to Betony officially. He later committed suicide on the ship back to Sentinel. Peace was a difficult process for the cities and towns on both sides of the Iliac Bay. As part of the formal peace treaty, King Gothred asked for the hand of Princess Abka Ai, only daughter of the late King Cameron and the Queen Regent Akarithi. The request was intended to restore friendship between the kingdoms, and it was partially successful though many in the royal court of Sentinel viewed the princess as more a prisoner of war than a bond to Daggerfall. The only surviving member of the ruling family of Gradkeep was a sickly infant, so the councilors of the state appealed to Lord Oberon Flight, a cousin of the Lord Graddock, to rule the lordship and regency. Lord Flight accepted, and his almost strong dictatorial style was just what Gradkeep needed to restore order after the bloody Treaty of Gradkeep. His subjects were grateful when the infant heir died. They not only elevated his wife Doriana and him from regents to rulers, they agreed to rename the lordship in his honor. Gradkeep became Anteclair, named after his ancestral home. The horrors of the War of Betony still live on, even in Anti-Clare. Whether Daggerfall or Sentinel will be able to use the marriage of King Gothred and Princess Apka I as a symbol of peace rather than discord is something that only the future can show. The 14th of Sunstorm, the Third Era, 404. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Newgate's version of the War of Betony. There's one thing I need to say is, as you can see, there's the War of Betony down here. But there's also another War of Betony, right, if I can find it, right here, the Favtes War of Betony, and one is written from the point of Sentinel, which I believe is that one, and then we just kind of got the Daggerfall version of the War of Betony. So, yeah, there are two technically War of Betonies in Daggerfall, so I will be back in a minute with notes for Redguard History. Notes for Redguard History by Destry Millarg. Biographical note. Destry Millarg was a well-known historian and translator of Old Redguard verse. Born as simply Destry in the city-state of Rihad in the 20th year of the Third Era, at the age of 19 he went to the Imperial City to study. There were few Redguards who had been to the Imperial province at the time, and it may be that he took the last name Millarg in order to assimilate with the Breton, Nordic, and Dark Elf cultures he encountered there. When he died, 94 years later, he left numerous unfinished histories and untranslated verse. Very few of his fragmented work has found its way out of collections. What follows is an unmailed letter to Millarg's publishers in the Imperial City. The insights into the man who put the oral traditions of the Redguards to paper impressed me enough to seek its publication. Melius, it should be noted, was Melius Kane, Millarg's publisher in the Imperial City. Foon. Regardic First Scholar, the Imperial University. Melius. This is the outline of my final chapter for this series on Hammerfell heroes. I condensed Dindal's storytelling. I have my notes, but the story gets long with all the quotes. She puts lots of dialogue in her storytelling. I'm amazed that the old stories about the five swords keep cropping up. It's been 1,000 years since Hellion's time, yet people continue to believe in the stories. The wagon master sat with me after listening to her story and smoked a pipe with me. In discussing the story, he said that his storyteller used to say that one of the five swords survived the closing of the Goblin Gate, and is yet hidden here in Hammerfell. It was the least of the five, but the story has it that it exceeds in modern blades, magicka, or ebony by several orders of magnitude. Of course, I take this with a grain of salt, since ebony weapon is unparalleled in its keen cutting ability, and personally, I can't imagine a weapon doing more damage than the claymore of Firestorm or a saber of lifesteal. Dindal even believes that out in the countryside, outside of Skaven, is one of the halls of the virtues of war. There are still people who follow the old ways and can form a shahai, or a spirit sword. In collecting these stories, I once thought I was seeing a shahai being formed by an old hall master, but the thing, if it was a spirit sword, was so faint that even the sword shape was questionable. I didn't want to insult the old man, so I claimed I saw it too, but if that was the shahai, I can't imagine it possibly used as a real weapon. Here's my outline of the new story. At the time of this story, Hammerfell is fully occupied by Redguards. All the old cities of the dwarves, not ones but one, the ghost city of Dwarfholm, are now cities of today's modern Hammerfell. A second invasion of the giant goblins come. Hammerfell is unprepared except for a few faithful followers, all youths in the rural halls of virtue. Holland, being the only Onse, rallies the armies of Hammerfell. After a defeat, he brings back the old way by telling each warrior to read the Book of Circles. The army fights the goblins to a standstill, but things look bleak, just as in Davad's song. Somehow the goblins keep being resupplied, both with arms and troops. Eventually the army of Hammerfell will lose. The old master of Holland's Hall of the Virtues of War has an ancient copy of Davad's will and testament and reads it to the Holland. It tells him that the five swords aren't lost, just hidden and well guarded in 5 caves. Each cave is home to a master guardian, one of the old blind Onsai, and also a maze. According to the will, Derek must, along with a virtuous companion of pure heart, enter the cave, defeat each Onsai master, and retrieve the sword. Dindal went into great detail here. It seems that each master had an outstanding trait. One, Catrice, possessed feline grace and become very cat-like. Another, who had icy calm, was something much like an ice golem. On each blade is inscribed part of an intricate message on how to use the power of the swords combined. Derek scours the rural halls for brothers of the blade and maidens of the spirit sword to accompany him in the quest. He finally, one by one, finds his companions and wins each sword. They learn from the blades and together wield the force of the 5 swords to seal the rent in space-time that the goblins have made, and from which springs their invasion. Holland's companions avoided blinding by the magic sword by hurling the swords together into the void and sealing forever the giant goblins in the void between their world and ours. The land is saved, and Holland and his companions, 3 women and 2 men, become Onsai and restore the teachings of Frondar Hunding to Hammerfell. That's the story in brief. I welcome any comments from you or one of the other editors. One other concern of mine. I understand that you are considering using a better-known writer, Uthela Opka or Casimir Kreestrom, to write these stories I've researched. I can understand that a better-known writer may mean that a few more copies of the books will be sold, but that should not be your only concern. Opka and Kreestrom, while fine writers and poets, will need to be lectured on the true histories of the Redguards. Even if you are willing to pay me to do that, you will have to acknowledge that the books will take longer to write than if you just allowed me to do it. Just something to consider when you make the decision. I hope this letter finds you and your consort and children to good health and humor. Yours faithfully, Destry Millard. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was notes for Redguard History. Oelander's Hammer by Kroll. An instructive tale for children. The two children, Frodwig and his younger sister Sylvanda, had been exploring all morning. The noon sun was directly overhead, and everything was warm and bright. They had left their Redguard village, Granitsta, early that morning for a day in the wilderness, a picnic, and with a stern warning from their father to be home before dark. They crossed a huge field that was a bare, save a single rose bush right in the middle. The little girl asked Frodwig about it. Well, he said, according to father, a great battle was fought in the place many years ago. The battle was visited by the god of all warriors, Raymond Ebenarm, who caused the leaders to end the battle and return to their homes. It is said that the rose bush grows where he stood that day. Oh, how exciting, giggled Sylvanda. The children continued their trek, approaching some woods. As they entered the forest, the air became very cool, and a deep quiet seemed to envelop them. What is that? Sylvanda pointed to a large hole in the ground from which protruded a long, thick pole. Around the hole, thorny plants had grown into an impenetrable wall. I don't know, said Frodwig, but let's see if we can get a closer look. Stop. They did. Looking beyond the hole, the children saw an elderly Redguard of many years. His gray beard, scraggly hair, and stooped shoulders certainly did not support the authoritarian command he gave, but the children stopped just at the same time he approached. Who are you? Stammered Frodwig as Sylvanda carefully tucked herself behind her brother's back. My name is Honing Grovinger, and I live in these woods. Why can't we examine yon hole, Master Grovinger? Asked Frodwig. Because, my dear children, it and what it holds are cursed. Now, just who are you? He stuttered, mimicking Frodwig. Finally, gaining his composure, Frodwig said, I am Frodwig Ajmur of the village Granitsta. This is my sister Sylvanda. We are on an outing. Can you tell us about the mysterious hole? Well, said the old man as he slowly settled to the ground, why don't you sit here with me for a while, and I will tell you about Oelander's hammer. That's the handle of the fabled weapon sticking out from yonder chasm. With this, the children also settled into sitting positions in front of the old Redguard ranger. Grovinger began. Many years ago, there was a huge battle fought in this very field. Oh yes, I know, said Sylvanda, interrupting the old man. It was ended by the warrior god Raymond Ebenarm, and the magic rosebush grows where he stood that day, she continued breathlessly. The old man sternly cleared his throat, causing the little girl to again shrink behind her brother. Now, if I may continue without interruption. On the day that battle ended, a young Redguard soldier stopped in his spot, and as he was leaving to go to his home, he carried the equipment he had used on the field, which included a marvelously fashioned warhammer that he had been given to him by his father. The weapon was beautifully made, and unknown to the young warrior carried an enchantment that had protected him throughout the vicious battle, just ended. The young man, Oelander by name, rested by this very tree. Suddenly he was confronted by a wizard dressed all in black from head to toe. Without so much as a how do you do, the wizard demanded that Oelander give him his hammer. Still flushed from the battle, the young man just looked at the dark man and laughed. The wizard, shaking with rage, raised his hand to cast a horrible spell against the soldier. However, the young man was quicker. The huge warhammer whistled through the air, smiting the wizard a mortal blow just as the spell had left his fingers. There was a loud explosion. The children stared at the old man. He suppressed a grin and continued. Clouds of dust and smoke covered the forest clearing, and when the air settled, yon hole was there, with the hammer's handle protruding from it. Oelander and the wizard had vanished. The thorny vines you see grew up immediately around the hole, and to this day no one has been able to approach it close enough to remove the marvelous weapon. Many have tried, and all have failed. It is said that only someone of tremendous merit can take it. All of a sudden, both children in unison stood and shouted, Oh look, how the day is gone. We must go. If we are late getting home, our father will be most unhappy with us. As they turned to leave, Frodwig said to the old man, Thank you, Master Grovinger, for telling us of Oelander's hammer. You know, I may just came back for it one day and try to retrieve it. As they disappeared from this view, the old man said to himself, Ah, yes, Master Frodwig Ajmur, you might just do that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Oelander's hammer, and that is the end of today's bonus episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.